red liquid beads on Lyra's chin. It drips onto the white floor tiles, a sharp contrast against the sterile plastic. Above her, the chamber's vents let out a constant, predatory hiss of high-pressure gases. Despite the crushing weight against her ribs, Lyra's lips pull back into a jagged, defiant smile. She looks into the camera, her eyes bright and wild. I'll be honest with you. Seeing her face through the reinforced glass, I finally understood that humans don't want to be safe. They want to burn. 6 hours ago, the most dangerous thing in Lyra's hand had been a chilled cocktail shaker. She'd been leaning against the polished wood of the stellar drift, listening to the rhythmic clinking of ice against glass. Now, the only sound was the thrum of alien life support systems. The transition from oxygen-rich atmosphere to this pressurized tomb had been a blur of blue light and chitinous hands. Inside the chamber, the air felt thick as soup. Lyra's lungs groaned under the weight of 10 atmospheres. Every breath was a conscious struggle against a world that wanted to flatten her. She sat on the floor, her eyes fixed on the metal plates beneath her boots. 1, 2, 3. She counted the heavy titanium bolts securing the deck. 24 in total. Her fingers twitched, tracing the air above the seals. On the observation deck stood Researcher Protocol SP-13. The creature's compound eyes twitched, flickering as they processed the bio-readouts on his screen. To him, the human looked settled, peaceful. He adjusted the dials, increasing the pressure by another 2 atmospheres. SP-13 believed he was saving her. In his mind, humans were deep-pressure organisms, fragile things that would explode if the weight of the environment didn't keep them together. Crushing. Behind the reinforced glass, the alien watched Lyra's skin turn a dark, pressurized flush. He logged it as a sign of comfort, a biological homecoming. He didn't see the way her hands trembled. He didn't feel the metallic tang of recycled air that coated her tongue like copper. A drone floated in, carrying a tray of pale, scentless mush. It was the perfect nutrient blend, formulated to keep a human alive for centuries, without the risk of flavor-induced cardiac stress. Lyra stared at the gray sludge. It smelled like nothing. Across the sterile floor slid the nutrient tray, clicking into place. It tasted like cardboard soaked in lukewarm water. "More heat," Lyra whispered. Her voice was a rasp. SP-13 tilted his head, his chitinous neck plates clicking. The translation matrix hummed in his ear. To him, heat was a biological request for thermal termination. He checked the monitors. Her heart rate was spiking. Subject 08 requests termination? SP-13 muttered into his log. The pressure is not enough to sustain her spirit. She seeks the fire. Lyra didn't look up. She was back at the bolts. Bolt number 12 was slightly loose. She could feel the vibration of the station's core through the metal. If the pressure outside dropped, the pressure inside her would do the work for her. But first, she needed the burn. Lyra reached into the hidden seam of her jumpsuit. Her fingers brushed the smooth, cold glass of the Inferno bottle. It was small, discreet, a relic of a brother's dare and a county fair far across the stars. She remembered Toby's face, flushed red and streaming tears, laughing through the heat of a ghost pepper. That heat was home. Came the hiss of the vents again. SP-13 prepared the final stabilization sequence. He believed he was granting a dying wish. The monitoring station's sensors screamed. Inside the observation deck, SP-13 gripped the console until his chitinous knuckles clicked. Subject has breached secondary containment. The researcher hissed into the communications array. Through the thick, reinforced observation port, he watched the human's hand disappear into the hidden seam of her sleeve. Out came a small, amber-colored bottle. The seal Lyra broke with her teeth. Frantic grew the movements of the station's cooling fans as the internal sensors detected a sudden spike in organic volatile compounds. SP-13 froze. To the alien's biology, the vapor of concentrated capsaicin was a neurotoxin capable of shutting down a nervous system in seconds. He watched in horror as she tilted her head back. By the translation unit, her soft, rattling chuckle was misunderstood as a final, dying rasp. "She is consuming the termination agent," SP-13 recorded with frantic speed. Before reaching for the vial again, Lyra took the thin paper napkin from her nutrient tray. She folded it twice, smoothing the corners into a perfect square with a rhythmic, mechanical precision. She tucked the paper under the edge of the empty bowl, making sure the alignment was perfectly symmetrical with the floor tiles. The routine action was calm, almost bored, a stark contrast to the chemical warfare occurring in her lungs. Pure fire. Lyra tipped the bottle. She let 3 thick, dark drops of the Inferno sauce land directly on her tongue. The reaction was instantaneous. Her capillaries dilated, sending a rush of hot, crimson blood to the surface of her skin. To the sensors, this looked like massive internal hemorrhaging. SP-13 began the emergency venting protocol, believing the subject's body was liquefying from the inside out. "Stop the pressure!" Lyra screamed, but the words were lost in the roar of the atmospheric scrubbers. Technically, capsaicin does not cause a chemical burn. It is a master of molecular mimicry, a substance that binds to the vanilloid receptor subtype 1, a channel usually reserved for detecting actual heat. On Earth, plants evolved this toxin specifically to deter mammals, but humans turned the agony into a culinary staple. It was a biological contradiction. They pursued pain to achieve a state of sensory clarity. For Lyra, the burn was a tether. It was the only thing in this sterile, silent prison that felt like the sun. In that moment, the heat wasn't just chemistry. It was Toby. She could almost see her younger brother's 8th birthday cake, lopsided and covered in too much frosting. She remembered the dare at the county fair, the way the woodchips smelled after a heavy summer rain, and the sticky feeling of cotton candy on her palms. Toby had laughed until he cried, his face turning the same shade of red that was now blooming across her chest. If she died in this sanctuary, she would die without the smell of earth in her nose. Stood Lyra up, her legs shaking but her mind locked on a single point. She turned toward Bolt 24. It was the loose one, the one she had counted and recalculated for 6 agonizing hours. She didn't have a wrench, but she had the heavy, composite food tray. She jammed the edge of the tray into the gap between the bolt and the floor plate. The torque was a simple matter of physics. She threw her entire weight against the lever, her muscles screaming against the 10 atmospheres of pressure the alien's thought was mercy. The metal shrieked. A single, sharp crack echoed through the chamber as the bolt sheared off. Immediately, the pressure differential began to do the work for her. The safe habitat was a bomb, and Lyra had just pulled the pin. SP-13 watched the structural integrity readings plummet. He finally understood. She wasn't begging for death. She was breaking the cage. The classification of humans shifted in his mind, moving from fragile sanctuary species to apex deathworlder, in the time it took for the alarm to sound. The air screamed as it escaped through the breached seal. Lyra collapsed as the pressure dropped to Earth normal, her lungs finally expanding without the weight of a mountain on her chest. The hazardous red stains on her face weren't blood. They were badges of survival. 6 years later, the station was no longer a research facility. It was a diplomatic outpost, guarded by ships that the Council once thought impossible. The humans had arrived not as subjects, but as a force that viewed the deadly vacuum of space as just another environment to be conquered with a bit of spice and enough torque. The empty glass vial sits in a tray of gray dust. A new technician picks up the sheared metal bolt with a pair of forceps. The pressure gauge on the wall stays fixed at 0. Outside the thick glass, the stars are points of cold, white light. A single red stain remains on the white plastic floor.